You're watching The World with me, Charles Aniagolu. Now, the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, and the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, have been meeting in Brussels to discuss the details of a framework deal that the military alliance made with President Trump over Greenland. The leaders of Denmark and Greenland say they were not involved in the talks that led to Mr. Trump abandoning his threat over the semi-autonomous Danish island. Mr. Trump's climb down eased the pressure on what was a spiraling transatlantic crisis. The EU, which was bruised by the events of the last week, is insisting that a united front, much tougher language towards the US, and the prospect of a hefty economic counter-strike made Mr. Trump think again. Now, as the World Economic Forum in Davos concluded this year, what was meant to be a gathering for economic collaboration instead underscored deep fractures in global politics. From bold pledges on growth and innovation to sharp diplomatic clashes, the summit exposed fissures in the Transatlantic alliance. President Trump dominated the agenda with a provocative push to negotiate US influence over Greenland, throwing the centuries-old concept of alliance cooperation into question and reigniting tensions with European leaders over sovereignty and strategy. What began as economic dialogue quickly expanded into a geopolitical battleground, testing NATO unity, unsettling markets, and forcing European capitals to recalibrate their relations with Washington. Well, to help us unpack the fallout from Davos, I'm joined now on the line from New York by Arise Special Correspondent James Blue. Good to see you, James, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I do hope that you are in New York, because I just introduced you as being there, because I know you do move around quite a bit, which of course comes with the job, but I'm glad to know that we got it right and that you are in New York. So first of all, set the scene for us. What was the mood in Davos this year from what you could glean, and how did it differ from previous forums, some of which you yourself have attended in the past?
Yes, happy to be here with you, Charles. I am in New York. And I think what was different about this year's meeting, from what I can tell and from the people I've spoken to, that there were actually stakes. Oftentimes, the gatherings in Davos really are just about getting together just to talk. There isn't much of an agenda, and there really doesn't seem to be much at stake. Going into this meeting with the US demanding to have Greenland, demanding or threatening tariffs against countries that would oppose it, there was a real sense that something had to happen, something had to actually break for there to be some sort of unity and some peace. And so President Trump arrived, he spoke, everyone was sort of in awe of him, as is often the case. And over the course of his sort of day-long visit, he sort of came to believe that there is an agreement and an ability for the US to get what it needs from Denmark and Greenland through a NATO compromise. And so that really has made Davos an important place, a place where leaders come, they gather, they talk, and solutions are found. And that, for me, is a really big difference than past meetings that I've been able to attend.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it, because I think a lot of people would agree with that assessment. And as you said, Donald Trump loomed large over the summit with his intervention on Greenland, in a way reshaping the conversation with Europe and NATO. I mean, in your assessment, did this feel like a genuine rupture in that transatlantic relationship, one that is forcing, at least to some extent, a strategic recalibration?
Yes, Charles, I think there is a rupture. And as you look at these pictures of President Trump, his staff coming back to Washington last night, what really happened in Davos was not only did President Trump declare his sort of desire for America to sort of go it alone, for America to form this this peace council for Gaza, which has been the border peace, which has been authorized by the United Nations, authorized specifically for the administration of a post-war Gaza. But what President Trump is trying to do is sell seats on it, including Vladimir Putin, including heads of Israel and others, so that they can really be a counter to the Security Council. So that's one sort of point that makes you understand things are different from before. But also, you had the European leaders, and especially, I think, the MVP of the summit, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mr. Carney, where they really sort of declared the game of waiting and trying to depend on the Americans is over. And, you know, I think the Canadian Prime Minister, who's here at the dais now on our screen, really sort of declared we cannot pretend any longer that the U.S. is going to be our savior. And they talked about a real sort of separation, using the word rupture, as did the head of the European Commission, as did other speakers. And so I think what you have is a Europe that has, after this week, recognized that the United States is in a very different position. And as a result, they too have to conscript themselves differently. And Charles, I think this was really sort of the icing on the cake was the speech yesterday by President Zelensky of the Ukraine, who basically said to Europe, it is time for us to get our things together ourselves. We know how President Trump feels. Please support us. And so I think this is a permanent change in the Atlantic relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned Mark Carney there, the Canadian Prime Minister. I'm glad you brought it up because, I mean, we learned later that after his speech that Donald Trump decided he was going to withdraw the invitation he'd extended to him to join the Board of Peace. But, I mean, beyond just Mark Carney and all the rest of them, which leaders or blocs do you think emerged stronger from this Davos meeting and who clearly struggled to control the narrative? I mean, who would you say gained the most ground?
Well, in terms of gaining the most ground, I think the United States comes out of this conference stronger than when they went in. I think the evidence, the border peace is now a thing. It is been ratified and signed, and President Trump has named himself not as president, but as Donald J. Trump, the chairman of that board of peace. And potentially, this is an office that he could occupy long after he leaves the presidency. I think that places the U.S. in a very, very good position. The fact that the U.S. was able to sort of declare and could cause all of this fuss over Greenland, get the concessions that they wanted for an agreement to be declared with NATO, I think also sort of gives the U.S. an upper hand. At the same time, I do believe Europe emerges from this meeting sort of really kind of looking at itself. And my hope is that they will sort of act on some of the sentiments that were expressed about the need to find their own security solutions unrelated to the United States. And I think all of the language about, you know, we cannot allow ourselves to be vassals. We cannot allow ourselves to be bullied. We cannot allow ourselves to be sort of taken for granted the way President Trump has done. I hope will give Europe the resolve it needs to find and come together as President Trump and the Americans are suggesting they should. But I do believe the U.S. comes out of these meetings stronger in the sense that they have been able to bully themselves into what they have wanted. And clearly, in a world where alliances have been so strong and so important, they seem much less important at the end of this week than they did at the beginning.
And at the end of this summit, James, at the risk of making you repeat yourself, what, if anything, is different in global diplomacy because of Davos this year?
Yeah, very good question, Charles. And I think what is different about global diplomacy from this moment forward is that the United States, which has traditionally worked to kind of create the Western alliance, support the Western alliance, serve as a bulwark against sort of unilateralism, I think that is destroyed. That is completely and utterly no longer, I think, the modus operandi of the US. And as a result, I think the Europeans are just going to have to, quote unquote, get used to it. Whether that means they will find a way to arm themselves, organize themselves, defend Ukraine, who knows? But I think this whole idea, which was really first telegraphed in the national security statement from the president back in January, this whole idea of spheres and the US desire to control and sort of dominate the Western Hemisphere, I think that is going to become a very, very important factor. Isn't it very interesting? The whole issue of Venezuela and its sovereignty did not come up once at Davos. And it seems to be because there's this acceptance of the US invading a country, taking over its oil industry, deposing its leader, and sort of moving on. That sort of capitulation, I think, is an endorsement of what the Americans have done. No one wants to cross President Trump still. And we'll just sort of have to see what it means when the US needs friends, as it did after 9/11, when the US needs friends, as it did after the invasion of Iraq. Will people come forward and support the US efforts? President Trump has, I think, this week and his administration has made that much, much harder.
And James, of course, Donald Trump has 3 more years to go before he has to constitutionally leave the scene. If, come the end of his term, a Democrat wins the presidential election, would it be right to still see Davos 2026 as a turning point in transatlantic relations, or merely a flashpoint in a more fractious world order, a world made more fractious by Donald Trump and the Republicans?
Yeah, Charles, I think this is something that is much more permanent. I think there was the sense that, 4 years ago or, 5 years ago when Donald Trump first appeared at Davos, and, afterwards when President Biden had was elected, there was a sense that, well, maybe it'll be the, 4 years this way, 4 years that way. The people I've spoken to, the Europeans and other people in other parts of the world, there's no value in waiting for the U.S. elections. There's no value in waiting for the policy change. And although I think the Democrats have traditionally been much more interested in the Western alliance recently, I do believe that the next administration, if it is Democratic, will have a lot of convincing to do to convince Europe to come back and to sort of join hands as they've held hands in the past. That's simply because it is very, very dangerous to sort of say we're going to join hands and link with the Americans, and then 2 or 3 years on be sort of shown the door, as Donald Trump has in this instance. So I think European caution and European desire to protect itself will prevent the sort of historic ties that was the real sort of feature of the post-World War II era. I think that era is gone. I think that era is lost. And we really don't know exactly how the world is going to reframe and be reordered. But the U.S. at the center of sort of guaranteeing peace in the North Atlantic, I think that is an idea that is historic and will not in the future be the case.
James, thank you very much indeed for that superlative analysis. James Blue is Arise special correspondent. He was talking to me on the line there from New York.